The bone-chilling scream echoed through the still Arizona air as Penelope Richards stood engulfed in flames in the center of her modest kitchen. The cotton fabric of her dress transformed into a roaring inferno that climbed hungrily toward her face. Clay Astor had only intended to return the borrowed tools to Henry Richards. But as he approached the Richards homestead on the outskirts of Eagar, Arizona, that terrified scream sent him sprinting through the open door without a moment's hesitation. The scene before him froze his blood. Penelope, the quiet schoolteacher who'd arrived just 3 months prior, was a living torch beside the cast iron stove. Without thinking, Clay lunged forward, tackling Penelope to the ground and using his bare hands to smother the flames that consumed her skirts. The searing pain barely registered as he beat at the fire with his palms, rolling her across the wooden floor until the last embers died beneath his scorched skin. "Breathe, Miss Richards," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. "You're safe now." Penelope gasped for air, her face streaked with soot, eyes wide with terror as she realized what had happened. "The stove, my dress." "Don't speak," Clay said, quickly assessing her injuries. The dress was ruined, burned through in places to reveal angry red skin beneath, but miraculously, the flames hadn't reached her face or hair. Her arms bore several blisters, but nothing that looked life-threatening. His own hands, however, were another story, raw, blistering palms that throbbed with each heartbeat. "Your hands," she whispered, noticing his injuries. "You're hurt." It was 1881, and Eagar was still young, a small settlement carved from the harsh Arizona wilderness. The nearest doctor was in St. John's, nearly 20 miles away. Clay knew they'd need help and fast. "Can you stand?" he asked, trying to ignore the pain shooting through his hands. Penelope nodded weakly, and Clay helped her to her feet, supporting her with his forearms to avoid using his damaged hands. "Where's your father?" "Gone to Springerville with the wagon. Won't be back until tomorrow," she managed between shallow breaths. Clay surveyed the small cabin. They needed water, bandages, and something for the pain for both of them. "I need to get you to Mrs. Blackwell's place. She knows about burns and healing." Penelope nodded, leaning heavily against him as they made their way outside to Clay's horse. Getting her mounted was a painful ordeal for both of them. But soon they were headed toward the center of Eagar. Penelope cradled awkwardly in front of Clay as he struggled to hold the reins with his damaged hands. As they rode, Clay felt Penelope trembling against him. At 24, she'd come to Eagar to take over the schoolhouse after the previous teacher had married and moved east. Clay, at 28, had established himself as one of the more successful ranchers in the area, with a modest spread north of town. They'd exchanged pleasantries at church and town gatherings, but little more. Now, her life had quite literally been in his hands. Eagar had sprung up like many western towns, a mixture of determined settlers, hopeful farmers, and the occasional drifter looking for a fresh start. Its main street consisted of a general store, a small church, the schoolhouse, and a handful of other businesses. Most homes were scattered around the perimeter, with ranches spreading outward into the valley. Mrs. Blackwell's home sat at the edge of town, a neat cabin with herbs hanging from the porch rafters and a small garden of medicinal plants along one side. The older woman had served as the town's unofficial healer since losing her husband to pneumonia 3 winters past. As Clay's horse approached, Mrs. Blackwell emerged from her front door, alerted by the sound of hoofbeats. "Good heavens!" she exclaimed, rushing forward as Clay awkwardly dismounted, helping Penelope down as gently as his injured hands would allow. "What's happened?" "Dress caught fire at the stove," Clay explained tersely. "She's burned on her arms and legs. My hands got it trying to put it out." Mrs. Blackwell's efficiency was immediate and reassuring. She helped Penelope inside while calling instructions to Clay over her shoulder. "Unsaddle your horse and come in. I'll need your help, burned hands or not." The next hour passed in a blur of pain and activity. Mrs. Blackwell cut away what remained of Penelope's scorched dress, applying a soothing salve of honey and herbs to the burns on her arms and legs. None appeared to be deeper than the first layer of skin, painful but not life-threatening. Clay's hands were another matter. Mrs. Blackwell clicked her tongue as she examined the raw, blistered skin. "You've done yourself no favors, Mr. Astor. These will take weeks to heal properly." "Had no choice," Clay replied through gritted teeth as she cleaned his wounds with whiskey that seemed to set his hands ablaze all over again. Penelope, now dressed in a borrowed nightgown and sitting in a chair nearby, watched with tears in her eyes. "You saved my life." Clay tried to smile through the pain. Anyone would have done the same. "Not with their bare hands," Mrs. Blackwell remarked, carefully wrapping his palms in clean linen bandages. "Most men would have had sense enough to use a blanket." "Wasn't thinking," Clay admitted. "Just saw the flames and acted." After bandaging them both, Mrs. Blackwell insisted they stay the night. "Penelope needs rest, and you, Mr. Astor, are in no condition to ride home. I've sent young Tommy Jenkins to inform both your ranch hands and Mr. Richards of what's happened." That night, Clay slept fitfully on a pallet in Mrs. Blackwell's small sitting room, his bandaged hands throbbing with each heartbeat. Through the thin wall, he could hear Penelope's occasional whimpers of pain. Despite his own suffering, he found himself more concerned with hers, wondering if he could have acted faster, done more to prevent her injuries. Morning brought Henry Richards rushing through Mrs. Blackwell's door, his face etched with worry as he found his daughter. "Penny. My girl, are you all right?" The middle-aged widower knelt beside his daughter's bed, carefully examining the bandages on her arms. "I'm fine, Pa. Thanks to Mr. Astor," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been the previous day. "If he hadn't come when he did." Henry turned to Clay, who stood awkwardly in the doorway, his bandaged hands held stiffly at his sides. "Astor, I don't know how to thank you," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my girl." Clay shifted uncomfortably under the man's grateful gaze. "Anyone would have done the same, Mr. Richards." "Not everyone," Henry insisted. "And not many would have the scars to prove it." He gestured to Clay's hands. "You'll always be welcome in our home." Mrs. Blackwell interrupted the emotional moment with her practical efficiency. "Mr. Richards, your daughter needs to stay here a few more days. Those burns need tending and she shouldn't be moved yet." "Of course, Mrs. Blackwell. Whatever you think best." Henry looked back at Penelope. "I'll bring some of your things from home." Clay, feeling like an intruder on the family moment, backed away. "I should get back to my ranch. My foreman will be wondering where I am." "Absolutely not," Mrs. Blackwell declared firmly. "Those hands need proper care for at least 3 days before you even think about ranch work." "You'll stay here where I can tend them." Clay opened his mouth to protest, but was silenced by Penelope's soft voice. "Please, Mr. Astor, stay. Let Mrs. Blackwell help you, as you helped me." Something in her earnest gaze made further argument impossible. Clay nodded reluctantly. 3 days, then. Those 3 days changed everything between them. Confined to Mrs. Blackwell's small cabin, Clay and Penelope spent hours talking, learning about each other in ways that their previous casual encounters had never allowed. He learned that she had come west after losing her mother, accompanying her father, who sought a fresh start away from painful memories in Pennsylvania. She discovered that Clay had built his ranch from nothing after arriving in Arizona territory as a young man of 20 with little more than determination, and the skills he'd learned working cattle in Texas. "Did you always want to be a teacher?" Clay asked on the second afternoon as they sat on Mrs. Blackwell's porch while she tended her garden. Penelope smiled, the expression transforming her face despite the fading redness around her hairline from the fire. "Since I was a little girl. My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught me to love books and learning." Clay nodded, trying to adjust his bandaged hands to a more comfortable position. "I never had much schooling myself. Learned to read and cipher, but that was about it. Had to work from an early age." "That's why education is so important," Penelope said passionately. "Every child deserves the chance to learn, no matter their circumstances." Clay found himself captivated by her conviction, by the way her blue eyes sparked with intensity when she spoke of her students and her hopes for them. It was so different from the reserved young woman he'd seen at church socials. For her part, Penelope was seeing a new side of Clay Astor. She'd always considered him one of the more successful and respected men, an eager, handsome in a rugged way, with his broad shoulders and sun-browned face, but somewhat remote and serious. Now she witnessed his patience in pain, his gentle humor when Mrs. Blackwell fussed over his bandages, and the thoughtful way he listened when she spoke. On the third day, as Mrs. Blackwell changed the bandages on Clay's hands, revealing the raw, healing skin beneath, Penelope couldn't hold back her tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You'll carry these scars forever because of me." Clay looked up, meeting her gaze steadily. "A few scars are nothing, Miss Richards. Knowing you're safe is worth far more." The simplicity and sincerity in his words touched something deep within her. In that moment, Penelope realized that her feelings for Clay Astor had shifted from gratitude to something much more complex and frightening. When Clay left Mrs. Blackwell's the following morning, his hands rebandaged but healing well, he found himself strangely reluctant to return to his ranch and the normal rhythm of his days. Something had changed during those quiet hours with Penelope, something he wasn't entirely prepared to examine too closely. "You'll come back in 3 days for fresh bandages," Mrs. Blackwell instructed firmly, not phrasing it as a question. "And no hard labor until I say so." Clay nodded, his eyes drifting to Penelope, who stood in the doorway. "Miss Richards, I hope your recovery continues well." "Thank you, Mr. Astor." She hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps, when you return for your bandages, you might stop by the schoolhouse. The children would like to thank you properly." Clay found himself smiling. "I'd be honored." As the weeks passed, Clay's hands healed slowly. The initial rawness gave way to tender new skin, and eventually to shiny scars that pulled slightly when he flexed his fingers. Mrs. Blackwell declared him fit for light work after 2 weeks, though she continued to scold him when she suspected he was pushing too hard. True to his word, Clay visited the schoolhouse, where Penelope's students had prepared thank-you cards and a recitation in his honor. Watching her with the children, patient, encouraging, firm when needed, gave him a new appreciation for her strength and character. These visits became a regular occurrence, with Clay finding increasingly flimsy excuses to stop by the school or the Richards' home. Sometimes he brought fresh vegetables from his garden or game he'd hunted. Other times he offered to fix something around the schoolhouse or help Henry with repairs to their cabin. Penelope, too, found reasons for their paths to cross. She began bringing lunch to share with him when he worked at the school, or asking his opinion on books she might include in her lessons for the older boys who would soon be working ranches of their own. The people of Eager noticed this developing connection with knowing smiles and whispered conversations. Mrs. Blackwell, in particular, watched with satisfaction, having observed the first tentative sparks of something special during those days in her cabin. By midsummer, Clay had taken to escorting Penelope home from church each Sunday, often staying for dinner with her and Henry. These Sunday afternoons became precious to both of them, a time to sit on the porch as the Arizona sun cast long shadows, talking about everything and nothing. "Do you miss Pennsylvania?" Clay asked one such Sunday in August as they watched a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple. Penelope considered the question carefully. "I miss certain things. The green of summer, the changing leaves in autumn. But here," she gestured toward the rugged landscape, "there's a different kind of beauty. Harsher, perhaps, but honest. Nothing pretends to be what it isn't." Clay nodded, understanding perfectly. "That's what drew me to this country. A man can make his own way here, be judged by what he does rather than where he came from." "Is that why you left Texas?" Penelope asked, realizing she knew little about his life before Arizona. Clay's face grew thoughtful, almost guarded. "Partly. There wasn't much future for me there. My father died when I was 16, leaving debts that took our small farm. I worked other men's cattle for years, saving every penny." His hands, now healed but bearing the shiny scars of that fateful day, tightened slightly on his knees. "Wanted something that was mine that no one could take away." Penelope found herself reaching out to touch his scarred hand. "You've built something remarkable, Clay." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the summer heat. That evening, as Clay prepared to leave, Henry Richards made himself scarce, muttering about checking on the chickens, a transparent excuse that made Penelope blush. Standing by his horse, Clay found himself reluctant to leave, searching for words to express what had been growing in his heart over these months. "Miss Richards, Penelope," he began, his usual confidence faltering. "I've been thinking." "Yes," she encouraged when he paused. "The Harvest Festival is coming up next month. I wondered if you might. That is, if you do me the honor of attending with me." The words came out in a rush, and Clay felt absurdly like a schoolboy rather than a successful rancher of 28. Penelope's smile bloomed slowly, lighting her face in the gathering dusk. "I would like that very much, Mr. Astor." "Clay," he corrected gently. "I think we've known each other long enough now." "Clay," she repeated, the single syllable carrying a weight of meaning that made his heart quicken. As summer gave way to fall, their courtship progressed with a careful steadiness that suited them both. Clay was a frequent visitor to the Richards' home, and Penelope occasionally rode out to his ranch with her father to share Sunday dinner with Clay and his ranch hands. The Harvest Festival in September marked a turning point. As they joined in the dancing and games, their growing attachment became obvious to everyone and eager. When Clay led Penelope into a waltz, his scarred hand gentle at her waist, even the most hard-hearted observer could see the tender regard that passed between them. That evening, walking Penelope home under a canopy of stars, Clay stopped at the edge of town, turning to face her in the silver moonlight. "Penelope," he began, his voice serious, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Mine too. I never thought to find someone like you here and eager," he continued, gathering his courage. "Someone who makes me want to be better, who sees value in things I never considered important." Penelope's breath caught as Clay took her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long by some standards," he said, "but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Penelope Richards. I believe I started falling in love with you that day at Mrs. Blackwell's, watching your courage through your pain." Tears glistened in Penelope's eyes. "Oh, Clay, I love you too. How could I not after what you did for me? But it's more than gratitude, it's who you are, your kindness, your strength. Clay raised one scarred hand to brush a tear from her cheek. I'd like to speak to your father to ask his blessing. Penelope nodded, unable to speak past the joy that welled up in her throat. Their kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise exchanged under the vast Arizona sky. Henry Richards received Clay's request with a mixture of solemnity and undisguised pleasure. I've seen how you look at my daughter, Astor. More importantly, I've seen how you treat her with respect and genuine caring. The older man extended his hand. You have my blessing and my gratitude for making her happy again. Clay and Penelope announced their engagement at church the following Sunday, to the delighted approval of the eager community. Mrs. Blackwell was among the first to congratulate them, her eyes suspiciously moist as she examined Clay's scarred hands. Worth it, wouldn't you say? She murmured with a knowing smile. Clay could only nod, watching as Penelope accepted good wishes from the townspeople. More than worth it. The weeks that followed were filled with preparations. Clay worked with his ranch hands to expand his modest home, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. Penelope continued teaching while gathering the items she would need as a rancher's wife. Their wedding was set for mid-November, before winter set in but after the fall cattle work was complete. The entire town turned out for the ceremony at Eager's small church, followed by a celebration that lasted well into the evening. Penelope was radiant in a gown of ivory silk that her father had ordered from St. Louis, her auburn hair crowned with a wreath of late-blooming wildflowers. Clay, unaccustomed to formal attire, nonetheless cut a striking figure in his new suit, his normally tanned face slightly pale with emotion as he watched his bride approach the altar. "Dearly beloved," began Pastor Wilson, beaming at the couple before him. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Clay barely heard the familiar words, lost in Penelope's eyes and the miracle that she would soon be his wife. When the time came to exchange vows, his voice rang clear and steady across the church. "I, Clay Astor, take thee, Penelope Richards, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. And thereto I plight thee my troth." Penelope's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her vows, her gaze never leaving Clay's face. When they exchanged rings, Clay's hands, now strong and capable again, despite their scars, were gentle as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," declared Pastor Wilson. "What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." Their first kiss as a married couple was met with cheers and a few good-natured whoops from Clay's ranch hands at the back of the church. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and boisterous. Everyone in Eager had contributed something: food, decorations, music. Henry Richards gave a heartfelt toast to the new couple, his voice cracking with emotion as he wished them happiness. Mrs. Blackwell dabbed at her eyes, claiming it was just dust but fooling no one. As dusk fell, Clay led his bride toward the waiting buggy that would take them to their ranch. Penelope's hand was warm in his as they accepted final congratulations and dodged handfuls of rice thrown by laughing children. "Ready, Mrs. Astor?" Clay asked softly, helping her into the buggy. Penelope's smile was radiant in the fading light. "More than ready, Mr. Astor." Their life together began with the simple rhythms of ranch work and household duties. Clay marveled at how quickly Penelope adapted to her new role, managing their home with the same efficiency and care she had shown in her classroom. She continued teaching until the school term ended in December, riding into town each morning and returning each afternoon. For his part, Clay found himself working with renewed purpose. Every improvement to the ranch, every successful cattle sale, was no longer just for himself, but for the future they would build together. Winter in Arizona territory brought cold nights and occasional snow, but the Astor ranch was warm and snug. On evenings when the wind howled outside, they would sit by the fire, Penelope reading aloud from one of her books while Clay listened, sometimes working on small repairs, other times simply watching her, still amazed that she was his wife. "You miss teaching?" he asked one such evening in January as she closed a volume of Dickens. Penelope considered the question. "Sometimes. I miss the children, watching them learn and grow." She set the book aside, moving to sit beside him on the small sofa. "But I don't regret my choice, if that's what you're asking." Clay pulled her closer. "I just want you to be happy, Penny." "I am happy," she assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." As winter gave way to spring, Penelope had news that brought them both joy and trepidation. "Clay," she said one evening as they prepared for bed, "I've been to see Mrs. Blackwell today." Something in her tone made him turn from where he was banking the fire for the night. "Are you unwell?" Her smile was radiant if slightly nervous. "Not unwell. I'm with child. Mrs. Blackwell says the baby should come in late September." Clay stood frozen for a moment, processing her words. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering her in his arms with a whoop of joy that made her laugh. "A baby," he whispered, pulling back to look at her face. "Our baby." The months that followed were filled with preparations and planning. Clay added a nursery to their home, working in the evenings and on Sundays to create a perfect space for their child. Penelope sewed tiny garments and quilts, her hands moving deftly despite her growing belly. Summer brought heat, and the busy season on the ranch. Clay found himself torn between the necessary work and his concern for Penelope, who insisted on maintaining her normal routine despite her advancing pregnancy. "I'm having a baby, not coming down with a fatal illness," she scolded when he suggested she rest more. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." Nevertheless, Clay arranged for Mrs. Blackwell's niece, a capable young woman named Sarah, to stay with them as Penelope's time approached. Henry Richards also made frequent visits, bringing vegetables from his garden and staying for dinner, his excitement about becoming a grandfather evident in every conversation. On a sweltering September evening, as Clay returned from checking on a distant herd, he found Sarah waiting anxiously on the porch. "It's time, Mr. Astor," she called as he dismounted. "Mrs. Blackwell is already here. Mrs. Astor's labor started this afternoon." Clay's heart hammered in his chest as he rushed inside, barely pausing to clean the dust from his hands and face. Mrs. Blackwell met him at the bedroom door, her expression firm but not alarmed. "Everything is progressing normally," she assured him. "First babies take their time. You might as well make yourself comfortable, it could be a long night." From within the bedroom, Clay heard Penelope cry out, the sound tearing at his heart. "Can I see her?" Mrs. Blackwell hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly. But when I say it's time for you to leave, you go without argument." Penelope lay on their bed, her face flushed and damp with perspiration, her hair in disarray. She managed a smile when Clay entered, reaching for his hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," he said, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "You're here now," she replied, her voice stronger than he expected. "That's what matters." Her face contorted as another contraction seized her, her grip on his hand tightening until it passed. Mrs. Blackwell returned, carrying fresh linens. "Out now, Mr. Astor, we've work to do." The hours that followed were the longest of Clay's life. He paced the small parlor, occasionally venturing outside to stare up at the stars, offering silent prayers for his wife and unborn child. Sarah brought him coffee and tried to persuade him to eat something, but food was the furthest thing from his mind. Shortly after midnight, Penelope's cries grew more frequent and intense. Clay found himself pressed against the bedroom door, every fiber of his being straining toward her, hating his helplessness in the face of her pain. Then, suddenly, a new sound cut through the night, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Clay froze, hardly daring to believe it was finally over. Minutes later, the bedroom door opened and Mrs. Blackwell appeared, her lined face tired but triumphant. "Congratulations, Mr. Astor. You have a fine, healthy son." Clay felt his legs go weak with relief and joy. And Penelope? Tired but well, she did beautifully. Mrs. Blackwell stepped aside. "Go meet your family." Penelope looked exhausted but radiant, propped against pillows with a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Clay entered, her smile tender and proud. "Come meet your son," she whispered. Clay approached the bed with reverence, sitting carefully beside her to peer at the tiny red face nestled in the blankets. A shock of dark hair like his own crowned the baby's head, and as Clay watched, the infant's eyes opened briefly, revealing a glimpse of unfocused blue. "He's perfect," Clay breathed, reaching out to touch one miniature hand with his scarred finger. The baby's fingers reflexively curled around it, and Clay felt his heart constrict with a love so powerful it almost hurt. "What shall we name him?" Penelope asked, leaning against Clay's shoulder. They had discussed names throughout her pregnancy but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking at their son, Clay knew. "Henry," he said, "after your father, Henry Clay Astor." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as she nodded. "It's perfect." Young Henry proved to be a good-natured baby, growing quickly under his parents' devoted care. Clay discovered depths of tenderness he had never known he possessed as he rocked his son to sleep, or bathed the wriggling infant in the small tub by the kitchen fire. Penelope recovered well from the birth, soon resuming her household duties with Henry strapped to her chest or sleeping nearby in the cradle Clay had crafted. Their life settled into new rhythms: midnight feedings, the wonder of first smiles, the constant small miracles of watching their son discover the world. When Henry was 6 months old, the school board approached Penelope about returning to teach. The replacement they had found during her absence was leaving to get married, and the town needed an experienced teacher. "You don't have to decide right away," Clay told her that night after Henry was asleep. "We're managing fine with what the ranch brings in." Penelope touched his cheek gratefully. "I know, but I miss teaching, and it would only be 3 days a week. Mrs. Blackwell has already offered to watch Henry those days." Clay studied her face, seeing the yearning there. "Then you should do it. We'll make it work." Spring arrived, bringing new calves to the ranch and new challenges as Henry began to crawl, exploring his expanding world with boundless curiosity. Clay marveled at his son's determination, seeing echoes of both himself and Penelope in the way the boy approached obstacles with thoughtful concentration followed by bold action. Penelope's return to teaching was a success, with the children of eager welcoming her back enthusiastically. 3 days a week, she rode into town with Henry, leaving him with Mrs. Blackwell before continuing to the schoolhouse. On the other days, she remained at the ranch, balancing motherhood with the endless tasks of a rancher's wife. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Henry slept inside, Clay reached for Penelope's hand. "Are you happy, Penny? Truly happy with this life?" She turned to him, surprised by the question. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" Clay shrugged, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Sometimes I wonder if I've given you enough. Your father had hoped for more for you than being a rancher's wife in a territory town. Penelope shifted to face him fully. Clay Astor, look at me. When he met her gaze, she continued firmly. I have everything I could want: meaningful work, a beautiful home, a son I adore, and a husband who loves me enough to worry about my happiness. She squeezed his hand. What more could any woman ask for? The sincerity in her eyes eased something in Clay's heart. He pulled her into his arms, grateful once again for the twist of fate that had brought them together. As Henry's first birthday approached, they planned a small celebration. Henry Richards would come, along with Mrs. Blackwell and a few close friends from town. Penelope baked a special cake, and Clay carved a wooden horse as a gift for his son. The day before the planned party, Clay rode out early to check on a broken fence line on the far edge of his property. The work took longer than expected, the summer sun beating down mercilessly as he replaced posts and tightened wire. By mid-afternoon, he was heading back toward the ranch house, tired and looking forward to the cool water from the well, when he spotted the smoke. At first he thought it might be from the cooking fire, but as he drew closer, he realized with horror that it was far too much smoke. Urging his horse to a gallop, Clay covered the remaining distance in minutes, his heart in his throat. As he crested the final rise, he saw that a portion of the ranch house roof was ablaze, flames licking hungrily at the wooden shingles. "Penelope! Henry!" he shouted, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. He burst through the front door to find Penelope in the main room, clutching Henry to her chest, her face streaked with soot. "Clay, thank God!" she cried, rushing toward him. "It's the kitchen, the stove chimney. I tried to put it out, but it spread so fast." Clay pushed them toward the door. "Get outside now. Take Henry to safety." As Penelope fled with their son, Clay ran to the kitchen. The fire had indeed started around the chimney, where a buildup of creosote had apparently ignited, spreading quickly to the dry wooden roof above. The flames were already consuming the ceiling, dropping burning debris onto the kitchen floor. Grabbing a bucket, Clay raced to the well, filling it and returning to throw water on the flames. Again and again he made the journey, joined by Penelope once she had settled Henry safely away from the house. Together they fought the fire, but it had too much of a head start. "The roof is lost," Clay finally admitted, his face streaked with sweat and ash. "We need to save what we can before the whole house goes." They shifted their efforts to removing what possessions they could: Penelope's books, clothing, the quilt her mother had made, Clay's rifle and important papers, Henry's cradle. They worked frantically, aware that the fire was spreading despite their earlier efforts. As they carried items to safety, two of Clay's ranch hands arrived, having seen the smoke from where they were working. Their help allowed Clay to organize a proper bucket brigade, and slowly they began to gain ground against the flames. By nightfall, the fire was out, but the damage was severe. The kitchen was destroyed, and the roof over half the house was gone. Smoke and water damage affected much of what remained. As they stood in the yard, surveying the ruins of their home in the fading light, Henry sleeping exhaustedly in Penelope's arms, Clay felt a crushing weight of failure. Everything he had built, everything he had wanted to provide for his family, was damaged or destroyed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with smoke and emotion. "I should have been here." Penelope stepped closer, leaning against him despite her own exhaustion. "Don't you dare apologize, Clay Astor. If you had been here, you would have been doing exactly what you were doing out at the fence line, working to protect our home and livelihood." "But now we have no home," he said bitterly. "We have each other," she corrected him. "We have Henry. We have the land and the cattle. Everything else can be rebuilt." Her unwavering strength humbled him. Clay pulled his family close, holding them as the stars began to appear overhead. That night, they stayed in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, Henry sleeping between them on a makeshift bed. The next morning, word of the fire reached Eager, and by afternoon, wagons began arriving. Henry Richards, Mrs. Blackwell, neighbors from town and surrounding ranches, all coming to help. "We'll have the roof covered before nightfall," announced Abe Johnson, who owned the lumber mill. "Got plenty of men here, and we brought the materials." The women organized food and began salvaging what could be cleaned or repaired from inside the house. Henry Richards took charge of caring for his grandson, keeping the boy entertained and out of the way of the workers. Clay was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. These people, many of whom he had barely known 3 years ago, were giving their time, their resources, and their labor to help rebuild his home. "This is what community means in the West," Mrs. Blackwell told him as she handed him a plate of food. "When one of us falls, the others lift them up. You do the same for any of them." By sundown, as promised, a temporary roof covered the damaged portion of the house. The kitchen would need to be rebuilt properly, but the living areas were secure against the elements. Many hands had cleared away the debris and cleaned the smoke damage as much as possible. As the neighbors departed, promising to return the next day to continue the work, Clay and Penelope stood arm in arm, watching the wagons disappear down the road. "We're blessed," Penelope said softly. "So very blessed." Clay nodded, thinking of how differently things might have turned out if the fire had started at night while they slept, if Penelope hadn't discovered it when she did, if their neighbors hadn't come so quickly to their aid. "I love you, Penny," he said, the words inadequate for the depth of his feeling. "You and Henry are everything to me." Over the following weeks, the Astor ranch house was rebuilt, better than before. The new kitchen was larger, with improvements that Penelope had long desired but never mentioned. Their neighbors continued to help until the work was complete, refusing Clay's offers of payment. "You'll do the same when one of us needs it," was the common response. As summer gave way to fall, life returned to normal. Henry celebrated his first birthday in their renewed home, surrounded by the people who had helped rebuild it. As Clay watched his son smash his hands into the small cake Penelope had baked, he felt a contentment so deep it seemed to fill every corner of his being. That night, after Henry was asleep, Penelope joined Clay on the porch. The air was turning cooler, hinting at the approach of winter, but the sky was clear and filled with stars. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice both nervous and excited. Clay turned to her, immediately concerned by her tone. "What is it?" Penelope took his hand, placing it gently on her stomach. "Mrs. Blackwell confirmed it today. We're going to have another baby in late spring." Joy surged through Clay, followed quickly by concern. "Are you all right with this?" "Henry will be barely a year and a half old when this one comes," Penelope laughed softly. "I'm more than all right. I always wanted a large family, children close enough in age to be real friends." Clay pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You are a remarkable woman, Penelope Astor." "I have a remarkable husband," she countered, her arms tightening around him. "One who once burned his hand saving my life and who has been saving me in different ways ever since." The pregnancy progressed well through the winter months. Henry, now walking and beginning to talk, was fascinated by his mother's growing belly, patting it gently and saying "baby" with solemn concentration. Clay found himself even more protective than during Penelope's first pregnancy, ensuring she had help with household tasks and limiting her teaching to just 2 days a week. To his surprise, she accepted these restrictions with good grace. "I was exhausted by the end last time," she admitted. "And now I have Henry to care for as well. Your concern is not misplaced. Spring brought new calves, fresh green grass on the range, and increasing anticipation in the Astor household. Clay expanded the nursery, adding a second small bed for when Henry would eventually move out of the cradle. In early May, just as the wildflowers were painting the hillsides in brilliant colors, Penelope went into labor. Unlike Henry's birth, which had taken nearly a full day, this delivery proceeded quickly. Mrs. Blackwell barely arrived in time, and Clay found himself pressed into service as her assistant. "Keep her calm," Mrs. Blackwell instructed as Penelope's contractions intensified. "Let her squeeze your hands if she needs to." Clay knelt beside the bed, his scarred hands enfolding Penelope's as she worked to bring their second child into the world. Her strength amazed him, the determination in her eyes, the way she breathed through the pain, the focus she maintained despite her exhaustion. When their daughter slipped into the world with a lusty cry just before dawn, Clay felt tears on his cheeks. Penelope reached up to brush them away, her own eyes shining with joy and triumph. "She's beautiful," Clay whispered, gazing at the tiny girl Mrs. Blackwell was cleaning and swaddling. "Just like her mother." They named her Catherine Elizabeth Astor after both their mothers. Henry, brought in to meet his sister the next morning, regarded the baby with serious contemplation before pronouncing, "My baby," and attempting to climb onto the bed to hold her. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Astor family. The ranch prospered, allowing Clay to purchase additional land and expand his herd. Penelope continued teaching part-time while raising their children, finding a balance that fulfilled her need for both family and meaningful work. Henry grew into a thoughtful, responsible boy who shared his father's love of the land and cattle. Catherine, called Kate by the family, was spirited and clever, with her mother's love of books and learning. 2 years after Kate's birth, they welcomed another son, William. Completing their family. Through it all, the bond between Clay and Penelope only deepened. The passion of their early marriage matured into something even more precious, a partnership of equals, a shared vision for their future, a love that weathered every storm. Each night, as they prepared for sleep, Clay would take Penelope's hands in his thumbs brushing over her wedding ring. And each night, she would turn his palms upward, placing gentle kisses on the scars that had never fully faded, a silent reminder of how their story had begun. On the 10th anniversary of the day Clay had saved Penelope from the fire, they hosted a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors gathered to share food and music, to toast the couple's happiness, and to marvel at how much had changed in a decade. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Clay found Penelope standing alone by the corral, watching the sunset paint the western sky in familiar shades of orange and purple. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Astor," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Penelope leaned back against his chest with a contented sigh. 10 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you came charging into my father's kitchen to save me." "Best impulsive decision I ever made," Clay murmured against her hair, "though my hands might disagree." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't come by that day, if someone else had found me, or if—" Clay silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "I try not to think about what might have been. What matters is what did happen. I found you, I saved you, and somehow in saving you I saved myself as well." Penelope smiled up at him, her face as beautiful to him now as it had been a decade ago. "My hero," she said softly, "always and forever." As the last light faded from the sky, Clay led his wife back toward their home, where their children waited. The ranch house stood solid and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows so different from the modest cabin he had first built, yet still the heart of everything that mattered. Inside, Henry was reading to Kate and William in front of the fire, the three children a living testament to the love that had grown from that desperate moment when Clay had smothered flames with his bare hands. "I love our life," Penelope whispered, watching their children. "Every moment of it." Clay squeezed her hand gently. "Even the fire, even the scars," Penelope turned to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Especially those. They remind us of what's truly important, that love is worth any pain, any sacrifice." She raised his scarred hand to her lips. "That sometimes the most beautiful things rise from the ashes." As their children called them to join the story, Clay and Penelope settled onto the sofa, arms around each other, surrounded by the family they had created. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, witnessing the quiet miracle of a love that had begun in fire but had built, over years and through challenges, into something unbreakable. And in that moment, Clay knew with absolute certainty that he would gladly burn his hands 1,000 times over for the life they had created together, a life richer and more fulfilling than anything he could have imagined on that fateful day when a woman's dress caught fire at the stove, and a cowboy smothered the flames with his own hands.